Matthew Lavoie, solve real problems for real people and inspire others to do the same. That is the goal that Matt Lavoie lives and designs by. At NASA, contracted to ASRC, Matt contributes to a suite of interconnected data systems used for launch and mission operations, enabling data to be leveraged to make informed decisions. Matt, thank you very much for being here with us. The stage is all yours. Unmute yourself, don't be like me.
Of course. Thank you so much for having me. Hello, Craft. Let me get my slides advancing. So today I'm talking about assumptions. And to start off, even just seeing me here, you've probably started making assumptions about me. We all make assumptions every day. So many of them we don't even realize that we're making. So let me clear up some of those assumptions maybe. A few things about me. I am a UX designer. I actually have a background in development. I imagine a lot of you today are devs, but I hope you welcome me as a designer into this community. I have most of my experience in enterprise software as a service, so web applications. A long chunk of my career is kind of in that space. I am making space safer for humans, though it is worth mentioning. Not representing NASA or speaking for the government. It's always worth saying that when you work for the government. I'm also a dad. I've got a 9-month-old daughter who is amazing, just absolutely the star in my wife and I's lives. I'm also a hobbyist woodworker. Some little interesting tidbit about me. And I'm very inactive on Twitter, but feel free to reach out. I'm at Matt P. Lavoie. So those are just a little brief introduction about me. Maybe I validated some of your assumptions and maybe I disproved some of them. So let's kind of get into it. When I had this opportunity to speak at Craft Conference again, I thought, what is it that would be beneficial for craft? And I kind of reflected on, what is craft? What does it mean to be a craftsperson? And thinking about, me as a hobbyist woodworker, in fact, actually, here's something that I made. I made this little robot on a lathe. So that's kind of neat, but what's the difference between this and something that's created by a craftsperson, right? I'm a hobbyist. I don't do this for a living. I've not sold little wooden robots. And you might look at this and think, wow, that's really cool. But I couldn't give this to my daughter to play with. It's got parts that aren't safe. There's some lacking polish and refinement. The arms aren't the same length, all sorts of different things. And you probably have an answer to that question of what's the difference between a hobbyist and a craftsperson. But one of the ones that I think is really helpful to talk about are the decision-making skills. So a craftsperson has this experience. They have this capability to make these decisions that as a hobbyist, I might not even realize I'm making. So then I was thinking about, well, what can I teach you as far as something that I know to make you a better craftsperson here at this conference in 30 minutes or less. So that led me to how to banish silent assumptions and become an active decision maker. Because I think this is something that we all do. And whether I give this talk to you and you say, oh, I know all of that, and that's fine, but maybe it's going to be a good reminder. Or maybe these are things that you haven't really thought through and considered before. And either way, hopefully you're able to take something away from this talk and apply it to the work that you're doing, Monday morning when you get into the office or into your home office, as I'm working from. So as I kind of frame that, I want you to think about what you are working on today. Like what features, what applications, what problems are you working on? And maybe do you even, know what problems you're solving? Do you know what assumptions you're making in those? So as we talk through this, I'll kind of give you a few reminders to think about the work that you're doing today. And maybe you can apply this maybe immediately. So I've got an example here, and I want to kind of just jump right in. So I was talking about being a hobbyist woodworker. Let's say I need this. I need a rectangular piece of wood. Maybe it's 4 inches by 4 inches by 1 inch, and I've got this big chunk of wood here. So I may say, well, I need this shape. That's super cool. That's easy. I can take this block of wood and just do a cut here, right? And now I've got that shape. As just somebody who's, you know, a hobbyist woodworker, I know what I need. I know how to make a cut to get what I need. That's great. But as a craftsperson, and maybe some of you are familiar with woodworking, you may be screaming, no, don't do that. That's a terrible idea because you're going to end up with a bunch of end grain here. And end grain is fragile, right? Like these long, you know, the bits of the wood, the fibers of the wood give it strength. But if you cut it this way, right, you've got a lot of these loose end grains, and it's really easy for that piece of wood to break and snap. And that might not be fit for purpose for what I'm intending that wood block for. So instead, what I need to do is I need to come in here and I need to make one cut this way and another cut that way. And I can get a nice chunk of wood that has the end grain flowing around the length of it, which will be much, much, much stronger. And there's similar things that you're going to need to think about as far as how you glue pieces of wood together, how you screw, how you join, all of these different thoughts and decisions that as a hobbyist, I may be making these decisions of like, oh yeah, I need that piece. Let me just cut it. And I might not even realize the decisions that I am making without knowing that I'm making them. So I guess my point in all of that is we are decision makers. And I think it's really important for us to realize that even as, so I'm a designer, right? And I create feature specs and designs, and I, you know, work with the development team who implements those designs. I'm making a lot of decisions in that workflow, and a lot of decisions are made with my team. But even after, you know, a developer has picked up that design work and is implementing that code, they are also making decisions, right? It's impossible to think through every possible little thing, little change. And, you know, sometimes they'll come back and say, hey, did you think about this in the feature spec? Or what about this particular, you know, edge case or scenario or error state, whatever it might be. But we're all making these decisions. All of us, every person who's touching that code, every person all the way through shipping it out, right? And another part of that, right, the other side of it is we are decision spreaders. Maybe that's a weird way to say that. I don't know. There's probably a better way to say that. We are communicating these decisions. And a lot of times it's not even clear that we've made some decisions, maybe a decision we didn't even realize we were making, that we are now spreading to the rest of our team. So let's jump back into our example. As a designer writing a spec, as a product owner, you know, writing a user story, I may say, hey, I need a 4x4x1 block. And my feature that I write might say, cut this here. Great. Well, I've deprived the expert, right, that developer, who maybe is very familiar with the code, well, the wood in this scenario, I've deprived that craftsperson, the woodworker, from having the opportunity to make the decisions that would result in solving my problem of I need a strong 4x4x1 piece of wood. And instead, I've just said, here are the instructions, do this work. And I think so often, you know, if you think about the work that you're doing today, so often our work is framed in that way. You may say, no, Matt, you know, we write user stories, we frame them from the user's perspective. But so often, I feel like even in that world, we are given or giving these features that are just, hey, do this thing, add this button, implement this X, Y, Z, whatever it might be. And we're not really thinking about, well, what problem is this really solving for our users? And by doing that, we are laden our entire project with assumptions that may result in us not actually providing the value that we're looking to provide. So how do we avoid doing this? And this is, you know, this is not a perfect process that you can, you know, take in as cookie cutter or anything, but these are the kind of the 4 broad steps that I think anybody can apply into the work that they do today, right? So we want to start by identifying the problem, not the solution. And I think that's a really, really, really critical part of this process. Next, we want to call out our assumptions by documenting them. And this is really helpful to do as a collaborative cross-functional team exercise, like just kicking off a new project. In fact, I just did this the other day. Talk through what assumptions are we making here that we need to make sure we're validating. You know, do we have access to this endpoint? Are we able to authenticate with it? Is that endpoint going to give us the data that we need to be able to provide the feature that we're trying to, you know, deliver, right? So thinking through all of those assumptions, and then grab those assumptions and rank them. Figure out what's the riskiest assumption that you might be making. And how can you prove those assumptions right or wrong? And then the last thing isn't really a part of this process necessarily, but it's really really important thing to note, and that's be cautious when you're communicating those assumptions. Again, going back to, hey, cut this here versus, I need a 4x4x1 piece of wood, and maybe you're the expert who knows how to deliver that for me, right? I think actually, kind of to that note, a little bit of a kind of a backtrack. I think a lot of times as we're like, writing features, we think, okay, well, here's the ball and here's the goal. And when we write a feature, we say, hey, get this ball into this goal. And when thinking about like a football or American soccer kind of example, it's like, okay, yeah, hey, here's this thing. I've made it very clear, here's the net, kick the ball into the net. Perfect. That's the feature, implement it. But even if that is a perfect description of the feature that you need to make, again, decisions are going to happen, right? Oh, well, what about this error state? Oh, what about this placement? Oh, what about whatever? And a lot of times, all of these little decisions that are made very often without us even realizing we're making decisions can take us off track. So yeah, a little bit of a tangent there, but hopefully that kind of helps to illustrate the point I'm after. One other thing that I really want to highlight in this is that there's a very common trap that we all fall into. I'm not saying that, any of us are bad for doing this. It's a very human thing to do, but we think everybody, has the same perspective or frame of mind that we do often. And if we're not being like cognizant of like, hey, are we really trying to understand this? Are we really trying to be, empathetic or compassionate to the needs and desires and intentions and purpose and circumstance and worldviews of the users that we're trying to serve? We end up saying, well, I know how I want that to be. And that's what we implement, right? So it's such a common trap to serve that user that's in the mirror, right? Yourself, of, I know how I would want this implemented. I know what makes sense to me. But goodness gracious, like I know the products that I work on far better than our users because I spend, all of my life for the past few years working on these products, focused on them. Whereas our customers, yeah, they're using them. A lot of them are using them every day for their work. A lot of them maybe even using them 8 hours a day, but they're using them to a certain perspective, right? A certain lens, a certain frame. And for us, we're collaborating on, we're designing for these products. We understand the architecture, we understand technical constraints that are going to frame how we think about implementing features. And it's so important that we try to get out of our own perspectives, how we might want a feature implemented, how we might think it makes sense, and really think like, well, is that really what's going to make sense to the person on the other, on the other side of the screen? Or the other side of the voice interface. I don't know what you're developing. All right. So I've got a couple of stories that are like actual scenarios where assumptions have led teams totally awry. And then we'll go back through those 4 steps and kind of talk through kind of a step-by-step example of how we can maybe apply that to the work that we were doing. Again, when we get into the office on Monday, maybe. So this first story is the bank teller's misfortune. And this is a real story. It's about this team that was hired to design new software for this kind of regional bank. And this bank was, they'd upgraded all their computer systems. Things were kind of becoming modernized, but they were still stuck on some very old software. And this is I'm talking about like, black screen, green text kind of old software. And it was fine. It did the job, but they couldn't implement new features in it. They couldn't add new, support. They couldn't fix old bugs because it was very, kind of lost and dated. They realized they needed to modernize it. There were some, serious problems that they needed to address with this software as far as being able to move forward into the future. So they hired this team to basically re-implement the entire feature set from the old software, add on some new features, and do it with a graphical user interface. It sounds great. The team did an amazing job. They built the new software. They rolled it out to all of the branches. And when the bank tellers came in on Monday morning, they started using it. And something interesting happened. So the amount of time that it would take for a user to, or a customer to this bank to come in and do a deposit, um, basically ground to a halt. And the one thing that they hadn't considered was all of the bank tellers, right? You come up to the screen and say, hey, I need to do a transaction, I need to deposit something, whatever it might be. That bank teller can converse with you, can get your needs, understand what you're doing. And at the same time, with the old software, they had both of their hands on their keyboard and were able to use keyboard shortcuts to quickly navigate the system to get to whatever they were doing, even though the system was like slow as mud because it was this old, black screen, green text piece of software running on modern equipment through like some kind of middleware to make it still function. It was still faster than the users having to go and grab the mouse and go and look for the icon and click and point and find the right thing. So what they ended up doing was they rolled back the deployment. They let the bank tellers continue to use the old software temporarily while they did some research on the keyboard shortcuts and the commands that they had kind of missed as maybe a feature requirement in this new implementation, right? So they were able to go in, add some keyboard shortcuts, add some ways for the bank tellers to kind of speed up their way of navigating the system. That wasn't just them staring at the screen and navigating with a mouse. But again, there were some big assumptions that were made in the implementation of that software that weren't validated. I think maybe the biggest of which would have been that on Monday morning, going from system old to system new, the bank tellers were going to be just as fast. And it wasn't that they weren't able to be just as fast. It was that there were features that enabled them to be fast that weren't available, and they were entirely basically invisible features. They were part of the, you could say they're functional requirements, keyboard shortcuts, but they were pretty invisible to the way that they defined what all of the features were in the old software. So another assumption that they made was that they didn't count keyboard shortcuts as a feature. So yeah, really interesting scenario. I've got one more, and this one actually isn't in tech. It's in the physical world. So there were some very, very devastating earthquakes that happened in Haiti, probably about a decade ago now. And after these earthquake happens, there was a nonprofit group that ended up going over there to try to help get some of these communities rebuilt and get them back rolling again. And this one particular nonprofit group was over there. They were providing support to a community, building a lot of great relationships, really helping to make a difference and get this community kind of back to where they needed to be, have the resources that they needed. And they got to this point where they said, I wonder if there's anything else that we could do that would help make a difference, right? We know that one of the problems that this particular community is facing is that, there's getting kids into the classroom, having kids being there wanting to learn. And so what if we made that environment of the school more comfortable? It's pretty hot in Haiti and these schools don't have air conditioning. Well, what if we, maybe we can't install air conditioning, but what if we installed some ceiling fans? We put ceiling fans in each of the classrooms, and that might be a great idea. So they went ahead and did it. They ordered the ceiling fans, they got them installed into the school. And after they did so, they noticed that the relationship with the community that they had developed, that they had kind of grown with, was a little bit weird. It just wasn't quite right in the step. And so they went ahead to one of the people who's a leader in the community that they had engaged with, and said, hey, did we do something wrong? Did we offend you somehow? We're not really quite sure what's going on, but things seem a little off, a little weird. And the response that they got was that, we appreciate everything you've done for us, that you've helped out and brought resources into our community. But, we are very comfortable in this environment. We live here, we're used to the heat, and the ceiling fans, they're nice, but it's not necessary for us. What really would have helped was, that school has some holes in the roof. And if instead we, had put those resources towards, patching and repairing the roof, that would have actually made a big difference, because with water intrusion, right, going to cause structural damage eventually. Maybe this school building that we're trying to keep running isn't, going to be sound. So really that would have been the thing that would have made the biggest difference with those resources. And so again, going back, this is like framing, what's the feature, what's the problem that I would solve for myself versus what's the problem that this community is facing. Like, and in this situation, going right back up to that first bullet point in my list of kind of the loose process that I take when I'm trying to identify and make sure that I'm addressing assumptions is making sure that I know what problem I'm solving. Right. So I think there was a problem around wanting to have kids in schools and making sure that kids were comfortable in schools and able to learn and focus on learning. And maybe that there are some other solutions to that problem. But again, there was a bigger problem for this community, and that was the school building itself being sound. And so thinking through identifying that problem and then, actually validating the problem with the community you're trying to serve, you might really quickly learn that, hey, this feature that we thought was really important to build, maybe it's not actually what's needed in this situation. All right, so again, I want to remind you all what I said at the beginning. Think about work that you are doing. Think about a feature that you're working on, some spec that you're implementing or designing, some piece, some feature, some application, whatever it might be, and go back through this list. Do you know what problem your feature is actually trying to solve for your customers, for your users? Do you know what assumptions you're making going into the design and implementation of that feature? And these assumptions can be technical as well. Like, we're assuming some technology is going to, help us achieve some outcome that we want to solve this problem. I had one time I did this exercise, and one of our assumptions was that we needed to upgrade to a newer version of SQL. And we did some proof of concepting real quick, took a couple of hours, and we proved that we didn't. So it was like a really interesting, like, wow, this project just went from being a very large project because we need to upgrade SQL to be able to have these certain features to a much smaller project. Okay, the next thing, validate those riskiest assumptions. So that one, in that particular example, that was a very risky assumption because it was like a month of work to do that upgrade and to do all of the testing required that was going to be associated with it. So we validated that very quickly. And we're able to prove it's always good to upgrade, right? I'm not saying don't upgrade. I'm just saying, when you're trying to get a feature implemented, it's good to know what you have to do and what you don't have to do as part of that feature. And then finally, be cautious when communicating assumptions. Like I said before, don't tell somebody, hey, cut this piece of wood here. Talk with them, make sure that they know, I think that what we need to do is cut the wood here. What I'm trying to do is get a 4x4x1 piece of wood. Maybe you know how to solve that problem better than I do. All right, so let's actually, one last little thing here, a quick bias reminder. Our biases can lead to unchecked assumptions. Again, I know I'm talking about this, designing for that user in the mirror, but also, like, we all have biases. I have biases, you have biases. Remember to kind of think through, are any of these, am I making any assumptions that I'm not even aware of because of my biases? Biases? You know what I'm saying. All right, defining the problem. We'll do a real quick run through and then we'll jump into some questions. So if you do have questions as I'm talking about this, definitely throw them into that little Q&A block there. But yeah, so let's go ahead and get into that first step, defining the problem. So you may have a product owner or a designer like myself come to you and say, hey, we've got a new feature we need to implement. We need to sort our search results by publish date. And in this totally imaginary scenario, I'm picturing a blog or something that has articles, whatever it might be. And there's a search feature. And maybe I did some user research, and while I was doing user research, the user said, it'd be really great if when I do a search here, I could click, I want to see the most recently published things on top. So I might very naively say, all right, we need to implement a new feature that says sort search results by publish date. Great. And I might write that spec. I might write that user story. As a user of our blog, I want to search results by publish date so I can see the newest articles on top. Well, why do I want to see the newest articles on top? Well, maybe the newest articles are more relevant. What is the problem there though, right? Like maybe the older articles are showing higher than the newer ones. Maybe we have an issue with our search ranking. Maybe we don't need to ask our users to do a search and then sort the search results. Maybe we just need to have better search results. Or maybe this user is doing some reporting. Maybe there's a totally different problem that's outside of our, core, use case, our core garden path, where there are some users that want to report on the frequency of articles. I don't know, just kind of spitballing here. But again, think through, well, why does this user want to accomplish that task? What problem are they trying to solve? And by implementing this feature, are we actually really solving that problem, or are we maybe giving that problem a crutch? So to find that problem, how might we prioritize newer content above older search results, or get the results the user's looking for in the top 3 90% of the time? That is a metric that you can measure. That's actually in a previous product team I worked on. That was our problem statement. How might we get the result the user's looking for in the top 3 search results 90% of the time? And we hit it, actually. It was really great. And previously, it was really bad. So it's really helpful to frame that, like, what is it we're actually trying to do here? What is the problem we're actually trying to solve? We want our search ranking to be so good, the user doesn't have to do anything but type in a keyword and they're going to get their results on top. So from there, let's start documenting our assumptions. I like to frame these in like a we believe, we expect, we think, because it's, intrinsic in our assumptions is that they're coming from us. They are a limited perspective. We know that it's okay, but it helps to frame it in the, like, I know this is me with an assumption. So, I thought I had a couple written out here, but let me just kind of talk through a few assumptions in this search problem. So maybe in a technical assumption, we believe we're going to need to implement Elasticsearch. And there's a whole lot that comes along with that. Or maybe we need to implement some search technology, Elasticsearch being one of the options. Maybe that's a pretty risky thing we need to figure out, which of those options is going to be best for us in the current architecture that we have, technically speaking. We also maybe, we believe that our users are typing in the right keywords and getting the wrong results. Like maybe that's an assumption. Maybe we're not providing the context in our search results for the users to kind of find what they're looking for. Or maybe the articles that we're writing don't have the right keywords to match what the users are searching on. There's a lot of assumptions that can go into a feature like search ranking especially. So once we've written out, as a collaborative cross-functional team, ideally written out a bunch of assumptions, like just go to town. I like to do it on Post-it notes in this virtual space, using Mural or FigJam or whatever kind of digital whiteboarding Post-it noting feature set you have access to, Post-it noting them, and then throw them on a plane. And the plane that I like to use, I'm such a gray person. I know, like, some people brains work in black and white. I've worked with teams that got really ticked off at me by framing this with risk and confidence, because they're like, well, what do you mean by risk? So let me just touch on risk real quick. Risk is effort, all right? Like, how long is it going to take us to implement this? How much technical complexity is there? Risk could also be product direction. Maybe this is something that's going to like totally change the trajectory of our product. Is this actually in line with our business needs? Maybe we're changing that, and that's risky. Risk could be, it's cost, right? If we say like, well, we need some embedded technology that we need to purchase, and it's going to be $100,000 a year for that subscription. So that's a big risk there, right? So all sorts of different things that can kind of bucket into risk. But I like to frame it with like, how bad would it be if we were wrong? Like, we do this thing, how bad is it going to be if we're wrong? Well, maybe we implement a feature that now we have to support, and now we have to fix bugs in, and now we have to refactor when we change our tech stack. All of those kinds of costs that come along with it, right? How bad would it be if we're wrong? So that's how I think about risk. And then confidence, how confident are we that it's a thing we actually need to do? So in this search example, maybe to re-architect our search technology, I'm going to throw up here, I believe that we need to implement Elasticsearch or some other similar search thing. I'm very confident in that because right now we're doing some, scrappy SQL query that doesn't really rank our search results. And risk is pretty high because that's going to be a high level of effort, high level of infrastructure change that we're going to need to do. So that's something that in this bucket, we're probably going to need to validate first, right? Like that's like, let's prove a concept hit. Let's make sure that we understand that tech. Let's make sure we understand how we're going to implement it, all of that. And then, we get into these other categories. So things that we're pretty confident on, but pretty low risk. So like maybe, there's some extra metadata that we could show on the search results page. We already have the metadata. We already have the way to show it. We just need to add that. It's pretty low effort change to our search results, but it'll help give users the confidence that what they're clicking on is the right thing before they click on it. Great. These are things that let's go ahead and do them. Maybe we don't need to put in the effort to validate that design. Maybe we do. Maybe it's a lower effort to validate it. And then down here, you have your low confidence, low risk area. I say these are typically bonuses, right? They're like, well, if we have time, maybe they're extra attractor features. Maybe they're things that like we know would maybe set us apart from our competitors, but like, do we actually have to implement them? We're not super confident. We're not super sure that we have to. And then our low confidence, high risk or definite no's. Like, let's not even bother with those. If we're not confident we need to do it, and it's super risky if we were to do it, like, why are we even going to bother? So of course, this is subjective. Again, I live in a world of grays. I embrace it. But I really like to do exercises like this, especially with big epics and large features, right? Where you can kind of go through and you get your cards kind of all over and kind of talk through where they all fall on this sort of plane, so that you can decide which ones you're going to try to validate. That is the next thing, validating assumptions, and of course, documenting what you learn. This is a whole talk in and of itself, so I'm not really going to touch on it too much. I'm a big fan of user research. I think user research is very, very important. So that's one of the methods that you'll probably use to validate a lot of the design assumptions that you might have. Technical prototypes, I'm sure everybody's really familiar with doing those. We do them all the time. That's another mechanism for validating technical assumptions, right? It's just really important that you do validate those risky assumptions. Because again, how bad would it be if we're wrong? If it's going to be bad if we're wrong, we should really make sure we're validating them. And then, of course, be cautious when you're communicating your assumptions. If I say my feature is to, get something with bunny ears, you may think that I want a bunny, but maybe I don't. Maybe I want a dog with a little hat that has bunny ears on it. So that is kind of where I'm at with this. I try to apply this to all of the work that I do, big and small. I don't always do the big old grid, right? I think that's something that is always useful when you're, on an epic. But if you have a small feature, maybe you have a bulleted the list of 5 assumptions, you can just kind of move them up and down the list to say, well, the one on top is the riskiest and the one on the bottom is not. And we're pretty confident in all of them. So let's figure out what we need to validate and what we don't need to worry about here. Anyway, all right. So with all of that said, I want to make sure there is time for any questions if any have come in. So let's go ahead, and I think I'm maybe close to being on track with time. Oh, here's another thing that has bunny ears. All right, there we go.
All right, thank you very much, Matt. Right now on our slide, we don't have any questions. I'm actually curious about, have you heard, of course you heard about it, but what is your take on design sprint?
I think design sprints are wonderful. I love that they get really everybody involved, right? I love that it's a very rapid, focused time. I don't think that they work for every situation. And a lot of times, right, teams are in ruts, teams get in rhythms, teams get kind of stuck in the pattern of reacting to things instead of being proactive. And I think design sprints are a great way to kind of get out of that. So I think, I like them a lot, but I don't think that they always work in every situation.
Okay, that's great. All right. With that said, we don't have any more questions. If you would like to actually say a little bit more about
Sure.
Validating assumptions, we still have some time, still have around 7 minutes.
Perfect.
You just want to say a few words about validating assumptions, that would be really cool.
Yeah, I'd love to. So I think
just on like high level, you don't need to go super deep. Just what is okay, so here's the question then.
Sure.
What is the most important thing that someone needs to pay attention to when validating an assumption?
Well, I mean, I think it's really just thinking about what is, I'm all about like effort versus cost, right? So like what is the cheapest, easiest, most rapid way that we can figure out if we're right or wrong about an assumption? And I think with that you carry in some risk, right? Like I don't know, there's different ways to think about design and design research, and there are different schools of thought in it. And some folks think, you know, you need a very large sampling, you need to do, you know, large studies. But for me, I very much kind of follow the tenet of like, what is the quickest way we can get an answer that we're have a pretty high level of confidence in? Like maybe it's not the perfect answer, maybe it's not, you know, 100% like scientifically sound approach to the research, but that's okay, especially when you're in a consumer environment. It's all about moving fast. It's about, you know, getting to that answer as quickly as you can, as efficiently as you can. And a lot of times that means, you know, doing some research. Maybe as you do, you learn, you change your approach, you ask different questions, and just be rapid about it, right? Going to your customers, you know, every week and asking about a different thing every week versus doing a study with 20 people in 2 weeks about one thing. I would always choose going to a single customer once a week and just having whatever it is that I want to do some research on with that customer. I think that gives you a lot more opportunity to, you know, learn and, you know, be agile, right? You
Kind of
every
have
question that
a
you ask, you're going to learn
startup
a little bit
approach
more.
to every product, right? So validation, validation, validation.
Yes, yes. And you know, again, it is so important to realize that we are making assumptions about things every day, right? Like I said, you all made assumptions about me when I showed up, and it's just part of the human nature. We do it subconsciously. And so you were handed, you know, a feature and you're immediately going into solutioning. That's so often, I am so guilty of this all the time. You know, I hear like the hint of a problem and immediately I'm like, oh, this is how we could solve that. But taking that step back to pause and say, okay, well, what problem is it that we're actually trying to solve here? And is that really the right problem, right? Like, are we installing ceiling fans or are we fixing the roof? What's the right way? You know, what's the, is it the right problem or is it the most important problem to address right now? And then once you understand that problem, how you intend to solve it, you are making assumptions in that whole path, right? So thinking through, you know, are are we just deciding how we want to solve it and acting, or are we actually thinking through the decisions that we're making? You know, like, oh, I need a piece of wood, am I just cutting, or am I thinking through, is this the best way to get the piece of wood that's fit for purpose in this particular situation?
It's very funny that you said that because today, earlier, we had a talk with Holly Cummins, and she was talking about George Washington Carver,
Hmm?
the guy that invented peanut butter, and she was talking about how he came up to, you know, to peanut butter, but because he was trying to make soil more efficient. And it was not about it was not about having inventions. It was more about solving starvation, solving the awareness of the land.
Yeah.
It's interesting because the problem that he wanted to solve was not exactly the problem that, you know, that was for the product. He was trying to solve something even before. That's very cool.
Yeah. It's a beautiful
Matt,
serendipity.
yes, it is indeed. Yeah. And actually, Holly, you should contact her. She's really, really, really cool. And the way she told the story is also amazing. Anyway, Matt, thank you very much for this talk. I really, really enjoyed the concepts and everything. For everybody that is watching this talk, if you want to have a question afterwards, just please jump into Hopin, send Matt a question. And Matt, is your presentation available for download?
Yeah, can I get that to you all to get
Yeah,
somewhere,
you
or
can
I
send
can
to.
I can put it somewhere?
Yeah, great. If you can just send, like, I don't know, a website or somewhere where we can
Sure.
just, you know, download if it's available, of course.
Of course.
Then we would be really thankful.